Welcome to our session, Ultra Rares, What's in a Research Study. This session, I will be opening the sessions, and then we'll have Esmeralda Vasquez and Connor Montgomery, who will be taking up the stage and presenting research from their perspective as a patient, or like as NHF is now naming them or coined the term subject matter experts. We believe that every patient has a perspective, that it's unique to them, and that it's very important. Um, no matter how great of a researcher you are, or what great of a physician or a caregiver, in my case, a nurse, we always, we would always be missing that piece. So we're very purposeful and very interested in that perspective, and including that perspective in everything that we do. So we'll have them up here to tell their stories. Please feel free to ask questions. So we have no disclosures. So when we all get up here, we're going to introduce ourselves, of course, and I will provide an overview of clinical studies, and we'll provide the community member perspective, so the SME perspectives, and then we have a little group activity if we have time. So my name is Maria, and I am the Director of Research at the National Hemophilia Foundation. I've been a nurse a long time, but for 17 years, I was a hemophilia nurse coordinator for the University of Miami, so I was mostly in pediatrics, but for 7 of those years, I was both pediatrics and adults. I helped open up the adult center, recognizing that there was no care for them once they left our pediatric center. So I was going to do it briefly, ended up doing it for 7 years, but loved it, and I'm very proud that it's still in existence, serving our adult population. I joined NHF 5 years ago. All right. So I want to start with like a simple definition, right? What is research? And you have a ton of different definitions, but basically it's a process, it's a systematic process, so a process that it's orderly and that it's got some structure to it, in which we're trying to gain new knowledge. And it's basically how science evolves, right? You have a research study, you learn new things, then new questions develop, then you do another research study, you continue, and so on and so forth. So it's a progressive, methodical, systematic approach to things. So, the right terminology, though, it's a methodological investigation designed to produce or contribute to generalizable knowledge. It depends on who's conducting the data, who's conducting research, so that's the goal. Who's conducting it and for what purpose, right? So if you have an engineer, they have their own type of research. If you have marketing folks, they're doing their own type of research, right? They're trying to figure out how to sell you their products. So it depends who's doing the research and for what purpose. So that's very important, because I know that as a bleeding disorders community, we receive a lot of surveys on the phone, on our internet. We get asked to participate in a million different things. So it's really important. It's your responsibility to understand what is that research for, who's conducting it, and for what purpose. Who's participated in research before? All right, great. What type of research? Has it been clinical? Sorry? Clinical research? Okay, so in the clinic. What about surveys? Has anybody participated in surveys? A million of them, right? That's a type of research, right? Maybe people don't understand it as such, but it is a type of research. You have research that's conducted in the lab. You have research that is considered surveillance. So they're basically looking at a population and making sure that everything, to recognize patterns that are perhaps abnormal when they start arising in the population. You have, sorry? Interviews, focus groups, all that stuff is definitely research. You have clinical trials. You'll be hearing a lot of new drug development and gene therapy. That's definitely a type of research, right? And they're all, again, who's doing it for one purpose, and they all have different risks inherited, that are associated with those research protocols. And it's important to recognize that research is a big spectrum, and there's room for everyone in there. So you might feel really comfortable going and testing new drugs, on yourself, but you might not feel that that's something that risk that you're willing to take. So maybe you engage in surveys, maybe you get engaged in developing research studies, right? So we'll hear a little bit about those opportunities later through Esmeralda. So I'm gonna go take you to a scenario, just a very simple scenario, so that you can start understanding how it is that we develop the questions, right? So in the kitchen, this is a kitchen exercise, right? And maybe if you guys went to Donna's research talk, you may have seen some of those slides. But you first make an observation, right? So you get to the kitchen that morning, you want to toast your bread, and the toaster does not work. And so you say, okay, I wonder what's going on, right? So you actually ask a question. So in research, that's called a research questions, but it's basically the same. You wonder, why is it that it's not working? So then you decide, well, then you propose an idea and you say, well, I wonder if it's the outlet. Maybe it's the outlet that it's not working, right? So that's what in research you call it to be a hypothesis. It's an idea. You have an idea of what the answer to the question might be, but you need to test it, right? And so you go to the lab and you predict and you say, okay, maybe if I plug the toaster into a different outlet, maybe it will work. Maybe it will toast my bread, right? So now what you do is you test the prediction. So that's when you go and you say, okay, disconnect it from one, you connect it in the other side, and then you determine what happens. If it worked, you supported that prediction, right? You supported your hypothesis. If it didn't work, the prediction is not supported, and then you go on to answer it in another manner. In a nutshell, right? Everyday scenarios. Any thoughts, any questions? Okay. So when we're talking about when we're talking about clinical research and we're talking about research that is conducted in humans, you may have heard it from the past that we have a dark past in research, right? There were experiments being conducted in marginalized populations, in the African American population, for example, in the Tuskegee study, when they were looking at how syphilis progressed. And even though they had treatments for syphilis, they did not give them the treatment because the scientific community wanted to understand the progression of the disease. Obviously, horrible, horrific in these days, right? Nothing like that should ever happen. Um, we did research in prisoners because they were in prison, so why not? And so based on that, and mind you, that's recent history. That's from the 60s and 70s, and not far from where we are now. The worst of it happened, of course, during World War II and the German experiments on the Jewish population, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a dark past. Since then, there's the whole international research community came together to make sure that nothing like that ever happens. And we have very strict rules that we do to ensure that we obey to ensure that nothing like that ever happens. So in a nutshell, the goal of biomedical or behavioral research, so research that is conducted in humans, the goal is to improve the life of persons living in this condition, in this community with inheritable bleeding disorders. So the idea is to improve disease prevention. So how do we prevent a condition? Detection, treatment, and quality of life. Usually in any way, shape, or form, those are the goals of a research study. It is the foundation for evidence-based practice. Who has heard of evidence-based practice? So, right. So when you go to a doctor or a nurse or any kind of healthcare provider, you want to make sure that what they're recommending, it's something based on sound science. It's not what they think. It's not what their neighbors think. It's not, it's not what I've always done. It's what the literature supports. It's what the evidence shows. This is the medication that is used with this for this condition at this dose and at this frequency, right? It's not based on nothing or an opinion. It's based on science. So evidence-based practice just means that it's a gold standard. If you go to get treated for a cardiology situation, a cardiac situation, you go to a cardiologist, they're working within standards, within evidence. Same thing happens when you go to a hemophilia treatment center, right? You want to make sure that your hemophilia treatment center is treating you with the best of the evidence available. And then what I was telling you about is conducting following strict ethical principles. These ethical principles are federally statutes that we need to obey. There's organizations like in investigational review boards that look at your studies, make sure that it's ethical, that the risk and the benefits, it's balanced, that you're not putting somebody at high risk for no benefits, but that if you have something at high risk, the benefits have to be equally as promising. And it also talks about the importance of an informed consent. And I'm going to go a little bit about what that looks like. So when you look at clinical terrify, and just this is just basically on clinical studies, which means studies that are conducted to test diagnostics or test treatments or devices, right? And where the FDA is involved. And so you have the preclinical trials, and this is usually done in labs. It's usually done with animal models or cellular models. This is way before we get into the humans, right? We want to make sure that they're not toxic, that the animals behave in the manner that we're expecting, and that before we can bring it to the humans. Phase 1 trials is when for the first time, we start testing whatever it is, a device or a medication in humans. It's usually done in very, very small groups of people. Sometimes it includes healthy volunteers, but it's basically to determine safety, the dose, and side effects. Phase 2 is done on a larger group of people, and by larger, I mean it depends on where you are, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But it's more specific to the disease being studied. Right now, you're trying to see if the medication actually works. The FDA is involved in these studies because we need to do it in a way that it's systematic. Like I was telling you, that the studies are designed in a way that is actually going to provide the data that we need to approve that medication or approve that device. And so there's very strict rules as to how that is designed, and that actually takes is carried through in the clinic. Sometimes in our world, when some of these studies are actually phase 2 and 3, they're together. They start with a small group of people, and when they determine if it's good or not, they right immediately after they go into the phase 3. And that's because our population is so small, right? We have a rare population, so sometimes our studies you'll see it's phase 2, 3, and it's because they start as a 2 and then they design it from the get-go like that, and they'll use the same population. And then once phase 3 is finished, if everything is okay and the FDA approves the data and understands and absolute benefit is actually proven, then it gets approved by the FDA, and that's when you actually see it. You see it in the clinic. It goes from research to the clinic. Between phase 3 and phase 4, that's just a data that is collected, real world data, and now it's open. Now patients can get it because it's just a matter of writing a prescription, and so they continue collecting data. They collect adverse events. They continue to make sure that this drug is performing like it's supposed to be doing. This takes about 8 years or more. Sometimes it doesn't even make it to market. So it is very, very costly to run a clinical trial, especially in the United States. In a nutshell, the informed consent process, and mind you, I say process. It is a document. It's an informed consent form, but it's a process. And what I mean with a process, that is usually it takes, especially with clinical trials, you want to take time to read the consent. The consent has everything that you need to know about the study and probably more. So it has, 8 sections. They're obligated to have all those 8 sections. The reason for the study, risks and discomforts, benefits, alternatives to enrollment, right? It's very important that they give you, what's your alternative if you don't enroll, which sometimes is nothing. You don't enroll and nothing happens to you, right? Confidentiality, they have to address how they're going to keep your data safe, how they're going to keep you confidential, to everybody except the people that really need to know your ID. If there's any compensation or treatments in case of an injury, right? What happens if you get sick? If you have a reaction to the medication, who's going to cover your hospitalization? Contacts, because you may not have a question right then and there, but you may go home and go, oh my God, I forgot to ask about this. So who do you contact to ask questions? And then this is the most important part of an informed consent. Studies are always voluntary. You are never supposed to feel coerced. They're never supposed to pay you so you get into a study. You never should feel coerced in doing it. And you can always change your mind. So if you decide today that I want to participate in a study, and then later in 2 months I don't want to, you can say, I'm done. I don't want to do it. The exception to that, of course, is gene therapy. Once you get gene therapy, you got gene therapy. But in the vast majority of the cases, this is how it goes. All right, but what about bleeding disorders, right? So let's talk about now, let's narrow down research in bleeding disorders. So it is not news to you, I don't think, that inherited bleeding disorders are rare disorders. Some disorders, like the ones people in this room, right, are ultra rare. So let's look at what ultra rare means. So in the United States, we have 330 million people, okay, living in the States. When you look at, for example, you want to do a study in high blood pressure, you have 160 million people that you can find, right? So it's not hard to have a study on 1,000 people, on 10,000 people. They're everywhere, right? If you want to do something in diabetes, well, you have a pool of 17 million people that you can recruit for your study. So what happens in our study, in our case, when you're talking about hemophilia, there's almost 22,000 people with hemophilia in the whole United States. That's very different, right? Talk about hemophilia B, 7,000 people. What about factor 13 deficiency? There's 255 of you in the US that go to hemophilia treatment centers. This is data from hemophilia treatment centers. So this is very small, and you're welcome to take a picture of it. This comes from something called Community Counts, or the CDC HTC profile. It's open data. You can find it in the internet. It's something that all the HTCs report on a yearly basis. But the reason why I put it here is because, I mean, look at that. Look at factor 10 deficiency, 287 people. Factor 2, 123. What else do we want to know? Anybody here with a specific? Factor 5, let's see, 571. Platelet release defect, 55 people have been reported through an HTC. So you can imagine that conducting research in an ultra rare population is very hard, right? Very, very hard. All right, well, people say, you know, but there is a lot of research in the US done in rare disorders, right? But look at that. Less than 2% of all rare disorders disease is done in hematology disorders. And this doesn't just include inherited bleeding disorders. This includes anemias, thalassemias, sickle cells. Oh, sickle cells not rare, but you know, all the other rare conditions, right? So it's not this 2% of the 10% is not just bleeding disorders. It's all rare hematological disorders. So again, we need a lot more than this if you want science to progress. And in that theme, significant progress then really requires all of us to be engaged in research, understanding there's a spectrum of research. There's high risk, you know, potential research. There's surveys that perhaps the research is a little bit, you know, it's not as risky, but we all have the obligation to be engaged in this. If we want rare, ultra rare bleeding disorders knowledge to increase, it's going to take each one of us to work together. The doctors, the clinicians, the researchers, and the patients or the SMEs. So we might all put a little grain of sand, but at the end we can build something grand, right? But it will definitely take all of those little grains of sand. And, you know, most importantly is that, you know, research can't just be done in one population. You know, we need to include everyone in this room. We need to include everyone, different ethnicities, different backgrounds, whether you live in a city or in a rural place, whether, you know, you come from a different country or not, whether you know, it doesn't matter. We need, in order for these research findings to really represent you, you need to be part of those studies. You need to be part of that. So I challenge you to think that, you know, what is our obligation to ensure that science progresses? And I would challenge you to think that it's important for every single one in this whole conference center to at least think about it and at least understand the opportunities that are available to you and decide how much you want to give to make sure that you know, that the science advances. Any thoughts or questions? Okay. Because I work for NHF and I'm really passionate about this project, I thought I would sneak in there, shameless plug for our CVR, Community Voices in Research. So you have a handout in your hand, and I'll tell you a little bit about how this was born. When I was hired at NHF 5 years ago, the research department was part of the medical education department, and they say, okay, research needs its own department. If we're really going to advance science, we really need to make this a priority for NHF. And so when Michelle and I, which were the two nurses that were hired to do that, we had worked in HCC for years and we had been involved in research for years. And we knew that a lot of the research, the data that was being collected in HCCs was really being collected from the clinical perspective. A lot of factor levels, a lot of x-rays, a lot of joint movement, a lot of, questions, very clinical questions. How many bleeds have you had? That kind of stuff. And so we started thinking, and as nurses, we know we're advocates for our patients, and we started thinking, but what about the patients? What about their lives? What about that experience? What about waking up what about the sibling that is not affected? What about mom? What about dad? What about spouses? We know from cancer studies that kids who grow up with siblings who have cancer, they grow up to have chronic pain more often than the normal population. What about our siblings? What about our kids that are in pain for, their whole lives if they're, let's say an inhibitor patient, or those recurrent hospitalizations, or the inability to go on vacation because my brother had a bleed again, or, what is that doing to them? And we need to study that, right? And so Community Voices in Research was born. And what it is a community power registry. It's an instrument that hopes to collect information to describe the experiences of living with an inheritable bleeding disorders. It encourages participants to become active members of their healthcare, and it helps identify research priorities, right? If we can understand what that experience looks like, we might generate questions that we haven't thought of just because we don't know. We don't know it should be studied. In a nutshell, because I don't want to spend too much time on that, but I can certainly ask questions and I can talk about this for days if you're interested later. But we do this through electronic surveys. So you have it in your handout. We do a short enrollment survey. It's about 2 to 3 minutes. And after that, you get the baseline survey, which is a little bit longer. It's about 10 to 15. And mind you, we ask questions from boys and girls, well, 18 and older. So males and females, the same. Joint questions, bleeding symptoms, they're all the same, right? We don't want to discriminate because, again, we want to pick up anything that we don't know or we think we don't know. It gives one of the neat things about the CVR is that we actually give that data back. This is not NHF data. This is your data. And this is data that we want principal investigators, clinicians, researchers to come to us and try to help us see through it and understand what it's saying, what it's telling us. Obviously, in a confidential, de-identified manner. But we're asking HTC doctors and any researcher to come. We've worked with a PhD student who was working on pain in the bleeding disorders community. We've worked with an HTC provider who wanted to understand attitudes towards gene therapy. We do an array of things like that. We also provide educational resources, and we actually invite you to participate in virtual advisory panels. And what those are is like sometimes pharmaceutical companies will come to us and they want help in designing these studies. Well, we'll provide that connection so that we meet like in a Zoom call for about 3 hours. They compensate you for that, and then you can participate in that. And other research opportunities, of course. And we're starting to publish, we're trying to present, and we're already thinking of ways that we can return that information to you in a way that you can understand it so you can learn. We're in the process of transferring platforms. So we know that the CVR is going to get better next year when we are able to transfer it and make a better CVR. This is a few of the questions that we ask. We ask about employment, we ask about school, we ask about sexual activity, we ask about cannabis use, medical marijuana use. We ask about, pain, anxiety, depression, social support. We really want to understand what that patient's experience is like, and then start making correlations, and again, generate new research questions. So again, you have the QR code in there. Again, the shameless plug, I know. But if you have any questions, like I said, again, I'm really passionate about this. I think that understanding that patient's perspective is something that is severely missing from here, and that I think we all can, we all can move that science, that knowledge, forward together. So with that, I'm going to give the podium to Connor so that she can tell us a little bit of her story. Do you have any questions while she moves up here? Sure. So I forgot. Thank you for that question because I forgot to say that. So everybody at this time, we're thinking that next year we might open it to minors. It's just that we had the CVR reviewed by an IRB. They said they deemed us exempt, so that means that we're not over the purview of an IRB, but we behave as an IRB as if we were, and we do everything in the same manner as if we were doing it. So we cannot at this time enroll anybody below 19. However, this data that we're collecting is not just on the person with the diagnosis. You as a mom could certainly fill it out because we want to know about you too. I mean, what's going on there? I'm sure that as a mother, you have, this affects your life in some manner, right? We want to understand that experience. Dad can do it too. A spouse can do it too. If you are over 18 and you have a sibling that grew up with a bleeding disorder and yet you don't have one, you can feel it too. You can just say, I don't have a bleeding disorder. But we're trying to really understand that whole lived experience. And we know that the bleeding disorder doesn't just affect the person with a bleeding disorder, right? It affects the whole family. So thank you for pointing that out because I definitely forgot to say that. And like I said, I can talk about this for hours. So just find me. Connor?
Hello, everyone. So I would only take a few minutes of your time just to tell you a little bit about my story and who I am. So you guys have probably already seen me around. My name is Connor Graham. I am a carrier for factor 7 deficiency, and I also have a clotting disorder, factor 5 Leiden. So as you guys may have heard, I have been involved with the bleeding disorder community for about 10 to 15 years with my family. And a little bit about the research side, I'm actually a cell biologist. So I just graduated from grad school in December. Thank you. Thanks, y'all. I have a master's of science in biomedical science and specializing in cell biology and regenerative medicine. And so during my time in grad school, I actually studied a ultra rare disorder, not a bleeding disorder, but a mitochondrial disease. And it was extremely rare. And my focus was trying to find a treatment for this disorder. So if you guys remember the slide that Maria showed, I was in the preclinical part, right? I was testing cells and eventually we were going to get into animal testing. And so I feel like I bring this perspective of being a research scientist, but then I've also participated in research studies as a participant and a SME. So Esmeralda will talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So I feel like my main goal right now and to get across is the power of the participant. So right now I am not a practicing cell biologist. I am more of a science communicator. So my job right now is writing about science and specifically as it relates to people with diseases, disorders, and understanding their the power you guys have, the power to say, hi, this is who I am, this is my disorder, and this is what I need, and this is how you can, like, I guess, use me as a participant, or I volunteer as a participant, but I would like to be informed about these decisions. I would like to only be involved this much. And so my goal is to tell you about the power you have. One thing that I was talking about with my coworker was that as we move further away from calling ourselves patients, right, in a research study, you guys are more like partners, right? Without you all, the research goes nowhere, right? It's like we can have the questions, we can have the hypothesis, we can have the predictions, but without the real data, what do we have? And so as important as that is, I want you guys to all remember, as Mira stated, the informed consent. So it is up to you all to say, hi, I feel comfortable being a part of your research study. And let's say in 2 weeks, you're feeling some symptoms and you say, actually, I want to take a step back. I don't want to be involved in this, or maybe in the future. That is totally okay, right? Please do not feel pressured to be involved in a research study. Um, we understand as ultra rares that research is extremely important for the future, our own treatment, our families. But ultimately, it is your decision to say yes or no. You guys have any questions for me before I pass it to Esmeralda? No? Okay, and then Esmeralda is going to talk about other ways to be involved in research. Oh, yeah, question? Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So the disease I studied, it was a mitochondrial disease that affected infants. And so sadly, they did not make it into adolescence and never really into adulthood. And so very often, since I was in the preclinical stage, it was very hard, I guess, to get focused on, wow, this experiment that I'm doing on these cells are not working. Oh my goodness, it's taking 4, 5, 6 months. But I feel like one thing, being a patient with a rare disorder, I guess I remember the importance, right? So I'm like, okay, yes, it's taking 5 to 6 months. I'm getting the same results. Actually, something's messing up. My cells died. I don't know what's going on. I feel like it just allowed some, I guess, grace in this space, right? And it's like, hey, Connor, I understand you're having a rough day, a rough month, a rough couple of months, but remember the end goal, right? It's for these people who are affected by this disorder, this disease. And if you are in their shoes, because kind of you are a little bit, like, aren't you just thankful that someone is trying to find a cure or a treatment for your disorder? And so for me, I feel like it really brought in this perspective of, it's not just about this moment in the lab or this month in the lab, right? What's the end goal? Who's the end goal? Who is it for? So, yeah, thank you. Any more questions? Okay, cool.
Hi, everyone. It's so nice to see some familiar faces. So my name is Esmeralda. I was diagnosed with Glanzmann's thrombasthenia at the age of 1. So I pretty much grew up in the healthcare system. I've been participating in research studies from a very young age, as surveys or through blood draws. I have never been invited to a clinical trial for gene therapies, but I know that if I was ever asked, I would gladly participate. But I feel like I have a high tolerance for that risk. For me, it's worth it, and I know that's just my perspective and my story. But there's other ways to participate in research. If you're still a little fearful of clinical trials, or you are concerned with a lab having your blood, or sharing personal information in a survey, there's wonderful ways to participate. So recently, I have become a subject matter expert, and my journey began with Dr. Valentino, who I've known for over 20 years. And I feel like that's where my journey began. I met him at a very tough period in my life. And I feel that at that moment, he kind of took his expert hat and he placed it on mine. And he let me take charge of my plan of care, and he listened. And I think when you grow up in the healthcare system, you realize and you can feel when a healthcare provider cares for you. We know it. We sense it. We sense the energy, despite a lot of the stressors that the healthcare system provides on a physician with productivity expectations and time limits. But we know when somebody cares and they extend that empathy. And that's where I feel like that's where it all began. And he moved on and he evolved into other roles throughout different companies, but we always stayed in touch. And then about a year and a half ago, he reached out to me and he's like, hey, I think I have a role for you in the National Hemophilia Foundation. And I mean, I was excited, and he started talking about the state of the science research and then the National Research Blueprint. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. It's terms that I had never heard. But I mean, I was excited, and I was like, yes, please sign me up. And he said, all right, well, you're going to have to be, you're going to have to hold it up because there's going to be some very top physicians. And I had no idea. I mean, I'm a healthcare professional, but being on the other side is completely different. And it was a very humbling experience. So then I joined the State of the Science, and then I met Kevin Mills, and he invited me to participate in the National Research Blueprint. And Kevin Mills has a really nice way to balance the power. I mean, he's a very well-known and very well-respected scientist. And in a panel, somebody once asked me, what would you like to see different? And I remember some of the barriers of participating in studies, like having to drive all the way to Milwaukee on a Saturday and not being able to go to a birthday party because I had to participate in this study. And I said, it would be nice if researchers would come to our community and meet us where we're at so they can see how far we have to travel, any barriers, to see where we live. And he emailed me, and he's like, you know what, I'm gonna take up on that offer. I'm gonna go where you're at. Kevin lives in Boston. I live in the south side of Chicago. It was COVID, things were closed, and I invited him to the library because that was all that was opened. He gladly came, very humbled. And from there, I joined the National Research Blueprint. I've met Maria, met so many good relationships. And then I'm now part of the HEDI group, Health, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. And I mean, I love HEDI. I experienced inequalities in the healthcare system, so I can appreciate that group. And now I'm kind of easing myself into the role of co-chair of the subject matter expert. And I feel like as subject matter experts, it's our lived experience, right? It's something that can't be taught in school. We have to help researchers and providers understand how we see life and what matters to us. And that's kind of the role of the subject matter expert. We're not just a patient participating in a research study. I'm glad to do that. But now in this new role, it's almost like we're a partnership now. We shared decision makings. So instead of just being this passive participant, we're like active participants. And I love that role. I love that I can participate in research in this particular setting. It helps me be more empowered. It has taught me educational, like I understand clinical trials, right? And we have different things we can contribute. I mean, we're beginning to understand that as subject matter experts, patients, we want to understand what is exactly a whole research process, like Maria explained, all the different phases. And as an ultra rare, I mean, I always cheer for my hemophilia brothers and sisters when a new breakthrough treatment comes out for them. But I always kind of wonder, well, what about us, like the ultra rares? And I understand now, I mean, it's not as easy to design trials for us, but I mean, they're working on it. And if we keep voicing those concerns, they'll hear us. We also can contribute to a research design. If we are part of the conversation and a researcher is trying to design a study and we're there present and vocalizing our concerns, and if we can say like, you know what, I can't take time off of work twice a week to participate in this study. Is there another way that it can be done? That's another way. We can help support with recruitment. This is crucial because we need as a diverse pool of participants as possible. Our genes are different. So we need, like, as I'm Mexican, so we need a lot of Latinos to participate in research trials. If we want to know if that treatment is going to be effective, we want to make sure that it's been tested in a wide, diverse group. Another one is that we can assist with recruitment. Sometimes there's still this lack of trust with the community, between community and researchers, and we can be this like liaison almost. So I've always kind of mentioned, like, it would be nice to have like a patient navigator program where somebody from the community can go and participate and recruit those individuals and explain like, hey, this is a research that we're trying to do, educate them, and they can be a little bit more trusting and participate in the research trials. Another one is that we can assist with dissemination. This is another one that the subject matter expert group has been kind of very vocal. A lot of the results of the research studies come out in these medical journals with, it's not very digestible, those terms. We don't understand analysis. And it would be nice if we can get a nice summary of those results so we can be like, hey, you know what? I participated in that study, right? It's kind of nice to read the work that you've done and how it comes back to us. And then another thing is that we can help educate regarding like social determinants of health. Like I mentioned earlier, commuting to the labs, taking time off work, all our social determinants of health, is everything in our community that impacts our health. Having to decide, okay, am I going to pay for gas? Or do I have to participate in this study? Or am I going to pay my rent? So all those factors affect our healthcare outcomes. And then the last one, as subject matter experts and sharing our own lived experience, we can kind of help bridge that trust between the community and the healthcare providers. So there's different ways to participate in research. And I invite you all to be, if you are a little hesitant to participate in a research trial, to please participate as a subject matter expert. In the next few years, we're going to be developing a lot of roles, and we're going to be reaching out to the community to participate. And it's just an exciting way to learn about research, make our voice heard, and just overall be a more active participant versus just a passive participant. Any questions? Well, I mean, I know how to explain the National Research Blueprint.
Is everybody familiar with the National Research Blueprint, the effort that Esmeralda was referring to? Okay, so in a nutshell, and I was yeah, you could. When Dr. Valentino was hired, one of the things that they said is like, okay, let's put research at the forefront of what we do, because if we really want to improve the lives of everyone in our community, research has to be a main focus, right? So what he did was he assembled a community group, and this community group included scientists, doctors, nurses, physical therapists, social workers, SMEs, right? We created these groups, but the groups were humongous. The FDA was there, the CDC was there, pharmaceutical companies were there, everyone. And there was 6 working groups, and it was mainly separated by diagnosis. Basically, what they got together is they looked at gaps. Where do we need research in? What is it that we don't know? What is it that we need to advance? What is it that we need to learn more of? They created a list, and then they prioritized the list, right? It was not only creating research questions, but it was also prioritizing based on feasibility, risk, and if we had the resources to do it. How easy was it? How feasible was it to do it? So that happened. It culminated in a state of the science. We have all that information in the website. Again, I can talk about this for hours, so you can ask me any questions you want. And so after that, we were like, okay, we have a list of priorities. What do we do now? Okay, well, let's look at developing a national research blueprint. What is the best way to conduct this research, to address these research questions that we have? We have right now, the way we do it is clinicians, researchers decide on the research questions. They decide what is important, what they need to address. They're all working in silos. So Oregon's working on Oregon, Miami's working on Miami, New York. There's Athens. We have a centralized place where we're gathering some data through Athens, right? And we're trying to use that data a little bit more. But regardless, it's a very siloed process. Data is not shared. There's a lot of rules that prevent us from doing that, but that makes it very inefficient. It makes it very long, it makes it very inefficient, and it's just a very slow and cumbersome process. In the world of ultra rares, if you have 200 people with a disorder in the United States, you can't have one site, right, collecting information or designing a trial to address a question in that. We need to offer the opportunity to all 100 200 of them, and hope that enough of them decide that that it's a study that they feel it's important to them and contribute. So what we want to do is we want to shift a little bit of that. We want to kind of disrupt. That's a cool word right now, right? Disrupt that a little bit. How do we engage the SME community? How do we engage them in helping us ask those questions that are really do we need another hemophilia A product? Should we concentrate our efforts in doing something else, for example? Is joint disease in men, do we need more information? How do we start believing women now that tell us that they're bleeding in the joints? So, it's all that noise, all that power that you have, that you really have to influence research agendas and the way research is conducted. And then from the clinician and from the researcher's point of view, how can we make research more nimble? How can we make it so that it's quicker, so that we're more collaborative, so that we can design trials that people, regardless of where they are, where they live, they don't have to drive from South Chicago to Milwaukee on a Saturday so that they can participate in a clinical study? How do we facilitate that? Again, those are all barriers that if we really want to advance the science, especially, you already know, there's very few of you, especially in the ultra rares. How do we facilitate that so we really advance, right? So it doesn't take 20 years for us to develop a drug that treats, some of these ultra rares. So the journey that Esmeralda explained it's to prove that it is possible. I mean, you saw that she talked to you about Kevin Mills. Kevin Mills is a PhD. He's a super renowned researcher. He developed the company and he sold it. I mean, that's how successful he is. And she talks to him about him with Kevin, and he absolutely admires Esmeralda because her insights and the way that the perspective that she brings and the ability to integrate what she's listening with her own experience provides a perspective that we have been in the healthcare system and the research system forever. Sometimes we're like, oh, we didn't think of that, right? We're developing all these papers to tell everybody what we did with the state of the science, and she's like, can you put a summary at the beginning of the paper in terms that we could all understand, so that SMEs, when they read the state of the science manuscripts, they kind of have an idea of what they're reading? And that we have incorporated that in the manuscript. So when we submit the manuscripts to the medical journal, that in that language that nobody can understand, now you're going to have something that you're going to be able to read and get an idea. And maybe having that idea will allow you to understand the rest of the paper. So, it's little things like that that we've never done. And I'm not sure why, because I know why, because we haven't had anybody telling us that we were doing it all wrong. We have not, we were all up here and thinking you were all here, but we need to balance that power, and you need to help us do that. And doing that means that you need to get involved. And like she says, you can be involved just by talking, or you can get involved by filling a survey, or you can get involved in a clinical trial. But there's something at your level. It's something that you're, something that I'm sure you can find that will be, exciting to you, and that that you're contributing to it. So again, another topic I can talk for hours. So find me if you need me. I don't know if you have any questions. We had a little exercise that we can do. If you don't have any questions, I just want to make sure I have time. Any questions? Okay, so let's see. Yeah, so we have two scenarios, right? So Troy has dysfibrinogemia, which is a factor 1 deficiency, one of those really rare disorders where factor 1 doesn't really work as it's expected, right? That's factor 1, fibrinogen. He's interested in participating in an ultra rare research study. Troy schedules a meeting with the clinical research on Monday to discuss the opportunity. Again, right? It's all about understanding what the study is, what they're asking you to do, what kind of activities you're going to be asked, how many labs, how many diagnostics, whatever, right? The informed consent, that document tells you everything that you need to know. And so now that you know a little bit more, what are your suggestions about how Troy can prepare for this meeting? What do you think that his obligation is? Yes. Well, exactly. So you start thinking, okay, what do I want to know, right? And chances are that informed consent has all the questions that you have, but what are the risks to me? right? What are the benefits? Usually benefits in clinical trials are not directly to you. You're doing it for more altruistic for the future, right? You don't have immediate benefits, but you can have benefits down the road. What do I need to do? How many times a week or a month do I have to have blood draws? How far is the center from me? Will they cover transportation? Will I get a stipend for participating? Will Who pays for if I need to be hospitalized? Has this drug been treated before? Has something like this been done in another population? You know, anything, all the questions that you can imagine. You need when you sign up for a research study, you need to be comfortable that you know what you're signing up for. So hopefully you guys all heard me, but can Troy sign up for the study and later change his mind? Absolutely, right? Research nowadays is something that is voluntary. It's not something that we do um, just because, like we were doing it in the past. Now there's really strict ethical principles that we need to obey as we conduct research. So, and you can you can investigate those. There's a whole they're federal standards. So it's actually the federal governments that ensures that research is conducted in an ethical manner. So let's look at Betsy, which is in scenario 2. So she was approached by her hemophilia treatment center to see if she was interested in participating in a clinical trial for people with factor V Leiden, which is a clotting disorder, right? You heard from Connor, she has factor V Leiden. I have 5 minutes. Factor V Leiden is actually the opposite of a bleeding disorder. She clots a little bit more than normal. She has a tendency to. She's interested, but of course she has questions, right? They would like to start. So one of the situations that can happen is that if it's a drug study, they want to start the study right away, but she's not ready because what they're asking her to do is to change her treatment plan. So she wants to talk to her primary care doctor, right? She's like, I'm not sure. I'm doing well with this high blood pressure medicine or this factor that's preventing me from bleeding or whatever the case may be, right? She's not ready, and that's okay. She got the information, and she said, okay, I'll get back to you. That consent form is usually yours. You get a copy of it. You can take it home. You can dissect it. You can break it down. You can ask, and you can come back for more questions. So that's totally acceptable, especially if you're doing a clinical trial like that. So what would you advise Betsy in this situation? Obviously, I told you that's okay, right? That she should. I mean, I got nervous when I got the 5 minute. I'm like, oh my god, I need to talk really fast. Oh, they had a question. Okay. So anyway, so basically, what the two pearls of these scenarios is that that it's all voluntary and that you have the opportunity to ask questions. We all know as researchers that we are expecting for you to ask questions. And so that's totally fine. Never feel that's too much. Where's the question? Oh, of course. No, but they're good questions. Get ready. They're usually really good questions.
First off, for Betsy, the investigator should never have pressured her immediately. Like that should never have happened.
Correct.
And going back to Troy, I was actually involved with a STEM camp this summer, and a major university wanted to come in and do a research study with our STEM kids. They had to go through the IRB and everything. At the first meeting with students, it was the students and the researchers. Students came back to us and told us that they were told they had no choice. They had to participate. Those researchers went home the next morning. We couldn't allow that to happen. They went against their IRB.
Right.
So that's how serious people take the IRB. I mean, you have to, you can't force people into this. It just doesn't happen.
Yeah. And it was probably something completely low risk, like a survey or a focus group or something like that. But right, but this is exactly what I was trying to get across, is that it doesn't matter what the risk is, and even us that we're considered exempt, so which means that this is so low risk that we don't need IRB oversight. We still, with the CVR, we still do a participant agreement. We still have phone numbers that you can access us. We still, we're very clear. We protect the data. We're actually working with a software company because we knew NHF didn't have the the know-how to ensure that that would happen. So we do that to make sure that, we work with somebody that ensures that they're keeping things using the high quality standard, all that stuff. So we take research really, really seriously. Correct. Yeah, totally would be good.
No, any researcher makes these kinds of mistakes. It looks bad for all researchers and sets us all back. So we have to police ourselves.
Right. Any other questions? Any other comments? Now we have a 5 question. Oh, oh man, I confused the hand signals. Any questions for Esmeralda O'Connor?
You guys spoke a lot about informed consent, and I wonder, because my daughter is 9, and I was looking at some of the clinical studies available, and there is one for her deficiency currently available. Do they ever allow parents to consent for the minors to participate in different studies, or is it universally 19 and above?
Whenever you look at a schedule, they have at a research protocol, they have what we call inclusion and exclusion criteria. And what that does, that's part of the design of the study, right? And they try to, as they design the studies, they want to make sure that they're designed in a way that it's rigorous, that they're going to have the power, so they have enough patients to answer correctly the research question. But they also they want to make sure that there's no extraneous issues that could compound that would create biases within the data to answer that question indirectly. So sometimes you see how sometimes, for example, in gene therapy uses a vector to put a corrected version of your gene into your liver. Well, people who have liver disease have been excluded for the trials for obvious reasons, right? We don't want to add impact to injury. We don't want to we want to make sure that the livers are healthy. So and the inclusion criteria also addresses adults versus children. Usually when drugs are started or starting to come up, with few exceptions in other conditions, not bleeding disorders, where kids could be included from the get-go, it's usually 18 and above, usually 18 to 65. I know, ageism. I have a lot of older patients who call me like, why can't I participate in this study? That's ridiculous. I'm 72 and I've been excluded. So I call, whatever, it's funny, but so there's an age range. Once that phase 2 and 3 start to happen, then they start including the minors. Usually when it's approved, right? After that phase, then they start including the children. If they're at that stage when they're ready for kids, then we have parental consent, which is the same form that we use for everything, but the kids have to assent. And what that does, there's 2 types of assents. I think it's like 12 or 13 to 17 and 12 to, so a little bit earlier. So you're supposed to, and by the way, the consent forms has to be in a language that we all understand. So 6th grade, 7th grade, something like that. So theoretically, you should be able to read it and understand what it says. For the kids, you need to bring that language even lower. So, it's a way of getting the children involved. It's a way of having them, be part of that decision. But at the end of the day, you are making that decision. So researching kids it's a little bit more complicated because you're making decisions for your kid without really them being of age. But yeah, that's a good question. Consents, we do assents for the younger crowds. And you have to have both assents and informed consents. I'm just going to stand here.
And considering when you're working with children, there are protected groups within research. The IRB look at the instructions, they look at the research even harder because children are a protected group, just like pregnant women are a protected group, prisoners are a protected group. There are certain protected groups that you have to go even further into detail for the IRB to get approval through.
Good point. Any other questions? Any questions for Esmeralda and Connor? No? We're good? All right. Well, then, thank you for coming. It was a pleasure seeing you here. I hope you've enjoyed the conference so far. I think we have maybe one more session before the award ceremony. Go to the award ceremony. It's going to be amazing. And yeah, I'll see you around. I'll be here for any questions. And if you have, if you bump into me anywhere else, feel free to stop me. I'll be happy to address them. Thank you.